Ethan Vale wasn't the type of man who trusted easily. At 32, he had already built a global empire, forged through sleepless nights and ruthless decisions. But success had come with a price: loneliness. His mansion, though filled with staff, felt cold, mechanical. Everyone feared him. Everyone, except the new maid, Clara. She was unlike the others. When the other servants froze at his footsteps, Clara simply lowered her eyes and continued her work. She never tried to please him or speak unless necessary. Still, he noticed her. The quiet grace in her movements, the care with which she arranged even the smallest things, like the way she refolded his shirts so that the edges aligned perfectly, or the way she polished the glass piano keys he hadn't touched in years. Ethan found himself watching her when she didn't notice, how she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear when she was nervous, or how her lips formed the faintest hum when she thought no one was around. He didn't know why it bothered him so much that she remained so distant, or why her silence lingered in his mind long after she left the room. Then came the night that changed everything. Ethan had returned home past midnight after a brutal day of negotiations. The house was silent except for the faint ticking of the clock. But he wasn't ready to sleep. He poured himself a drink and sat in his study, scrolling through unread emails, his temples throbbing. That was when he heard her soft footsteps. Clara, working overtime again. A strange idea crossed his mind. One part curiosity, one part something else. He leaned back on the sofa, pretending to be asleep, his breathing slow and even. He wanted to see what she did when no one was watching. Minutes later, he heard her enter. The faint clinking of glass, the sweep of her duster, the soft sound of her humming. She moved carefully, always avoiding the spot where he slept. But then, after a long pause, he sensed her approach. His heartbeat quickened. He expected her to hesitate, maybe glance at his watch or phone. Instead, her whisper floated through the quiet room. "You must be so tired, sir." The gentleness in her tone made something shift inside him. He felt the light brush of fabric, the weight of a blanket being placed over him, and her trembling fingers adjusting it. Then a barely audible sigh escaped her lips. "You shouldn't have to be alone like this." Ethan froze. For the first time in years, someone's kindness left him speechless. Ethan couldn't shake off what happened that night. Lying there under the blanket she had placed, he'd felt something he hadn't in years: warmth. Not physical, but something deeper, unsettling. He had built his life on logic, not sentiment. Yet, that single act of quiet care had disarmed him completely. The next morning, he sat at the head of the long marble breakfast table, coffee untouched, eyes fixed on the door. When Clara finally entered with a tray, she paused upon seeing him, clearly startled. She usually cleaned the dining room when he was long gone to work. Now, his sudden presence seemed to freeze her in place. "Good morning, Mr. Vale," she said softly, keeping her gaze on the floor as she poured his coffee. Her hands trembled slightly. "Sit," Ethan said. Her head jerked up in shock. "Yes, sir." "I can't." "I said sit," he repeated, gentler this time, motioning to the chair across from him. She hesitated, then slowly lowered herself into the seat, eyes darting nervously to his. The silence between them was thick until Ethan finally spoke, his voice calm but edged with curiosity. "Clara, do you always take care of people who are asleep?" Her cheeks flushed instantly. I didn't mean to overstep, sir. You looked tired. I just thought that I'd catch a cold," he finished, a faint smile tugging at his lips. She nodded quickly, fumbling with her apron. "I'm sorry if it was inappropriate." He studied her face. The sincerity, the fear of having done something wrong despite her good intentions. "You could have taken my wallet," he said quietly. "Or my phone. I was testing you." Her eyes widened in horror. "You were pretending to sleep." Her voice broke, filled with disbelief. "Why would you do that?" Ethan sighed, guilt washing over him. "Because I've been surrounded by people who only pretend to care. I didn't trust anyone, not even the ones who work for me." Clara's voice softened. "You don't have to test everyone, sir. Some of us are just trying to be kind." Those words hit deeper than she could imagine. Ethan leaned back, the faintest hint of a smile curving his lips. Maybe I needed to be reminded of that. After that day, he found himself lingering when she worked, asking small questions, offering smiles he never used to give. And though she still blushed and looked away, Ethan realized something undeniable. For the first time in his life, trust felt like something worth learning again. Days turned into weeks, yet Ethan couldn't stop thinking about Clara. The mansion that once echoed with silence now seemed warmer somehow, softer. He started noticing things he'd overlooked before. The faint scent of jasmine that lingered when she passed, the way she hummed a tune that somehow made his mornings feel less heavy. He began to find excuses to cross her path. Some days he'd forget his watch in the living room just to have her bring it back. Other times, he'd appear in the kitchen earlier than usual, watching her prepare breakfast for the staff, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly messy but radiant in the morning light. Clara, however, remained shy, always polite, never overstepping. She would smile timidly and quickly look away, as if afraid her presence might bother him. Ethan noticed how careful she was, how every move she made seemed rooted in humility. One afternoon, a heavy storm rolled in, and thunder shook the mansion. Ethan was finishing some paperwork in his study when he noticed Clara outside in the garden, rushing to cover the plants from the rain. Without thinking, he grabbed an umbrella and ran out after her. "Clara, leave it, you'll get drenched," he shouted over the wind. She turned, startled, her hair plastered to her forehead, rain streaking her cheeks. "I couldn't just let them die, sir. Mrs. Green spent all week planting these," she called back. Ethan couldn't help but stare. Soaked to the bone, shivering, she still worried more about the flowers than herself. He stepped closer, holding the umbrella over her head. "You're unbelievable," he muttered, half to himself. She blinked up at him, confused. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," he said, his tone softening. "You're the first person I've met who still cares about things that don't benefit them." Her eyes met his for the first time, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to pause. The rain, the thunder, everything. There was something pure and steady in her gaze that unsettled him in the best way. Back inside, as she handed him a towel, Ethan found himself saying quietly, "You don't belong here as just a maid, Clara. You deserve so much more." She smiled faintly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe, sir, but sometimes, kindness is all I can afford to give." And that single line stayed with him long after the storm passed. Ethan couldn't ignore it anymore. The way his pulse quickened every time Clara entered the room, or how the sound of her laughter in the hallway could pull him away from his darkest thoughts. The woman he had once tested out of suspicion had somehow become the only person he trusted completely. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of the mansion changed. Clara's quiet presence had softened its rigid order. She would leave little traces of warmth everywhere she went. A vase of fresh flowers on his desk, a cup of herbal tea when he worked late, even a folded note once that read, "Don't forget to rest." Ethan had built his life on control, yet this gentle maid had managed to dismantle every wall he'd built, one small act at a time. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Ethan returned home to find the mansion unusually quiet. No distant humming, no sound of movement. Concerned, he called for her. "Clara." No answer. He found her in the kitchen, sitting at the table, her hands trembling as she stared at an envelope. She quickly stood up, startled by his presence. I'm sorry, sir. I was just." He frowned, noticing her eyes were red. "What's wrong?" She hesitated before whispering, "It's a letter from the agency. They're transferring me to another estate next week." Something inside Ethan twisted painfully. The thought of her leaving felt unbearable. "And you were going to leave without saying anything?" he asked quietly. Clara lowered her gaze. "You're my employer, sir. I didn't think it was my place to." "Clara," he interrupted, stepping closer, his voice low but firm. "You stopped being just an employee the night you covered me with that blanket." Her eyes lifted slowly, confusion and emotion clouding them. "Sir." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate silver pendant. Simple, elegant, nothing like his usual extravagant taste. "You said kindness is all you can afford to give," he said softly. "But you've already given me more than anyone else ever has." Clara's lips trembled as tears welled in her eyes. "Why are you doing this?" "Because," he murmured, his gaze unwavering, "you reminded me how to feel human again." That night, for the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel like the cold, distant CEO the world knew. He felt like a man, one who had finally found something worth holding on to. And Clara, shy and trembling, finally smiled the kind of smile that promised maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't have to face his loneliness alone anymore.